Hey, welcome back. This is Dr. Chad Kish, and we are going to wrap up our Unit 2 today with our final lecture, and it'll be in the method of a video lecture for Chapter 13. So remember, Unit 2, we started back in rubrics with rubrics and scoring guides for Chapter 4. We continued on to Chapter 8, talking about developing, culminating, and progressive assessments. So that was our progressive formative assessments that build into the culminating and summative assessment. And we are now wrapping up Chapter 13, which we're discussing grading in physical education. So let me go ahead and get us ready for today. So, like I said, this is our final lecture for Chapter 13, Grading in Physical Education. We're going to get into some different big ideas today. Those big ideas will include things such as what is standards-based grading? It's a style of grading to help students progress towards mastery or proficiency in various standards. What is mastery grading? All right, we'll talk about mastery grading, which is another method of grading that's used to raise the level of your students to try to get everybody to perform at a mastery level. How do you provide effective grades? How do you break those down into different categories? How do you put them out? Are they A's and B's and report cards, things like that? Uh, how do you consider the challenge of grading people with varying skill levels, right? Does somebody that's already really good that comes in the class get an A, and somebody that has a lower baseline score for the grade and works really, really hard and improves, do they get an A or do they get a C because they're not as talented as the first individual if we're in a team sports unit especially? How do you assign a grade for a special needs student, especially one on an IEP or a 504 plan? And then I have some additional suggestions for effective grading practices in a physical education classroom. So let's start off and discuss standards-based grading. So standards-based grading is a different style of grading. It's not your standard 0 through 10 on an assignment. You turn it in late, you lose credit. It's a little bit different. It's used a lot to help move students that have low baseline scores into some type of proficiency. So in standards-based grading, students receive a score on a specific standard or critical components of an activity. So think about the different things. We could use the NASPE standards to have, our global standards, or we could have specific components of a unit or specific components of a skill. Then students are going to work on those and earn their score, and we're going to report progress for achievement towards the final goal or proficiency in our specific standard or criteria. We would think of our rubric. We might have levels such as meets expectation, failed to meet expectation, below expectations, and then you could get to where they need to be as far as proficient and advanced. Right? In some programs, achievement for a standard is required to be able to move to the next standard. So if you think about a math class, students are going to have to understand adding and subtracting before they go on to multiplying and dividing and fractions. So you have to achieve the standard before you can even start the next assignment. This is really in asynchronous, remote type of learning, some online learning. You have to pass a test or reach a certain score before you can open the next unit or module. So that's where we talk about in some programs you need to achieve a certain level in a standard before you can even move on to the next. You'll have to go back and redo that standard. So once that standard is achieved, the student obtains the credit for meeting the standard, right? So if there's 10 points, once they achieve it, they get the 10 points and they can move on, right? This might mean a teacher uses the best score no matter when it occurred. You might have the best score on an assignment and then you have, say you're doing skills tests throughout a unit and the student scores a 9 out of 10 on the volleyball serve. But then you get to the culminating assessment and that has a skills test and they only get a 7 out of 10. You use their best score no matter when it occurred. It's kind of a different way of thinking. As long as a student meets the learning objective at a satisfactory level, they are awarded the credit. The deadline might be just at the end of the quarter or semester. It kind of takes a little bit of that compliance and meeting deadlines out of the grading cycle. So standards-based grading is quite a bit different than what we're used to. Some more information on standard-based grading. You're going to have to report it a little different. It's used to report learning in terms of content categories or standards. So think of this as a checklist. You'll put the unit learning objectives on a checklist, and as soon as the student meets the goal, you put a check on that specific criteria. And once they've got checks as yes in all the criteria, they move on to the next unit. It's just kind of a yes or no in a way. These reports here that you just developed are going to show exactly what a student has mastered and provide areas for them to target for improvement. It also helps you know what they have mastered and help them develop some areas to practice so they can move towards mastery in the areas that they have not mastered yet. This is beneficial for teachers in measuring specific student learning based on a criteria. So if you use the standards-based grading and use a checklist with categories, you'll know what students have not met, and you'll be able to plan the next day's activities for that student. It's really easy to see on this report or on your form where improvement needs to occur. And then you're going to have to kind of educate your parents when moved to standard-based grading, because most people are used to that A, B, C, D, F scale, and you're going to have to explain what mastery-based grading does and how it's used. And you might share your reports showing what they've mastered with them when you're assigning a grade. So the next type of grade reporting system we have is mastery grading. And it's another one that's a little bit different, kind of has some similar components to standards-based grading. This is where all students are expected to master the content. It's critical to set expectations at a challenging but realistic level when you do this. Students are allowed multiple chances over time to learn and perform the activities or content, and the teacher should really move the class and each individual towards full achievement and mastery. You'll still use an A to F grade reporting system at most schools, but some schools use a pass-fail reporting system when they go to mastery, because if you don't master everything, you fail. Once the content is mastered, no matter if your mastery is only at 70%, all right, if that's your challenging but realistic level, the students receive the full credit and they're awarded the A for that specific criteria. All right, D's and F's, remember, are considered failures. So they're not acceptable for progress, so students shouldn't move on. So students that have a D or F or an unsatisfactory score should not be allowed to get by and move on to the next level. So you might use mastery grading within a unit. Let's discuss some other important concepts around effective grading in physical education. Usually we want to set specific criteria and use them to calculate grades. A lot of teachers use points, and they're dependent on meeting some overall goals or objectives. More important objectives usually have a higher percentage of points. Some critical components on an activity might have higher points. Think of your specific rubrics. You might get 5 points for an introduction on an essay, but 20 points for college level writing, or 15 points for topic number 1. All right. The same thing goes for classes. Are assignments worth more points? Are tests weighed more heavily? Or assignments that have more depth have more points available? So that's where you get in your percentage of points or weighing your assignments. Grades, remember, should be based on some predetermined criteria. So that means students should know the criteria in advance. All right. They should know what the end goals are. They should have a rubric or a scoring guide, and they should really practice the most critical criteria and understand that that's worth the most amount of points. The other thing that's important is we need to decide the important criteria at the beginning of the grading period and then determine which assessments really contribute to the grade. Which ones are formative, just used for feedback? We might not always record those formative ones and use them for points. This could be discussion or where we're working on building a skill. It's really just used for feedback and learning. It's still part of the effort to obtain proficiency or mastery, all right? But if we're going to record the score, we need to let our students know that this is could be a daily or a unit end summative assessment or an assessment or assignment that is worth points. There are always a variety of challenges in effective grading practices. Everybody shouldn't get an A. Your course should be challenging. But there are some different things that are important. We went over this when we were developing our scoring guides. Remember the concepts of validity and reliability. Those are very important. Do we remember what valid means? Valid means, does it measure what it's intended to measure? All right? Does the test actually give us the results? If we're watching a volleyball game play scenario and we really are scoring the volleyball serve, are all the components on our scoring guide about the serve? So remember, another thing when we're developing our scoring guide, if we're really trying to see if students can understand and apply something, although we want them to write at a certain level and follow a format, if we weight the score for the format too high, it doesn't really show us if they can apply the skill. It shows us if they're a competent writer. So it depends on what your goal is. Remember, validity is very critical when developing grading practices. Another term that's important is reliable. Reliable means, is our scoring accurate and consistent? Is it, go back to a little bit to validity, but can we use our scoring guide and have multiple different people using the scoring guide kind of come up with the same type of score, right? So we need to make sure that our grading instrument and our scoring guide has enough detail for it to be consistent between different performers. So when grades are based on measures other than achievement, the grade isn't usually a valid indicator of the goals. This is important to remember when setting grading policies. Managerial things, some formatting things, some different stuff like that, it should really count less than 20%. It should be a portion of the grade, and then the bigger portion of the grade comes from, do they understand it? Can they actually do it? It shouldn't be, did they dress out? Did they show up on time? Unless you have some critical deadlines. All right. Remember, when we're developing grading schemes, a lot of times in physical education, we're doing things within the context of an activity. All right. When you're doing that, that means sometimes the skill that you're looking at may be dependent on other people. All right, so be sure the skills, abilities, and effort of other students do not influence the specific student your grading's grade. So what does this mean? If you're looking to see how well somebody spikes in volleyball, if the teammates that are on the front row with them are not very good bumpers or passers, it's really hard to determine if that person has the skills to spike in a game setting if they never get a very good set. Does a serve in tennis provide a fair opportunity to return using a backhand or forehand? So you're trying to use a checklist to see if somebody uses a backhand or forehand. If the person serving on the other side always hits it to one side and they don't have an opportunity to use the backhand, it's harder to score. So remember, when we're looking at things, try to take out any dependence on other students. If you're grading teamwork and the specific student's group or team doesn't have, isn't really engaged in the activity and isn't trying very hard, it's pretty hard to score that specific individual's teamwork. So those are a lot of things we got to remember. So there are some challenges in effectively grading a physical education class or performance. Some other things we have to remember is there's going to be a variety of skill levels in any type of class, especially in the gym. in any activities, there's going to be students that have a lot of experience and have done the activity before. No matter what grade you're teaching, elementary, middle school, high school, there's going to be somebody that's done it before, and then there's going to be at least one student that's never done your activity before. All right? So remember some of these things when you have varying skills. Students with prior experience generally score higher on assessments because they have background knowledge, background skills on the activity. All right? So this is where your pre-test can determine what level each student is at and allows you to determine where you want to go with each student. When you're designing your learning activities or your lessons after you get your pre-test or your baseline material, if your standards or goals are too high, your low-skilled students feel that achievement is unattainable and they don't even try. Oh, that's too hard. I'll never be able to get it done. I can't do that. I can't. All right? But if the standards are too low, your higher skilled students remain unchallenged and they don't improve and they get bored. When either of these things happen, this is where classroom management challenges really come in. People start getting off task, doing other things, flicking students in the ear, and sometimes injury can occur. So it's important to set appropriate levels of challenge, and you may have multiple activities within a class, so the students that have lower skill are doing some activities, and the students with higher skills are doing something with a different challenge. All right? So it's important to select a variety of units within a grading period too. So people that like team sports generally enjoy a variety of team sports. People that don't like team sports probably don't like hardly any team sports. So when you're developing your units, you should pair a team sport with some kind of individual sport, dance, recreational type activity, followed up maybe by something in a fitness or wellness unit, and then maybe come back to a team sport. Don't just stack all your team sports in a quarter, because the students that are going to be connected to an idea will do really well in one unit and then get really bored for a long period of time. So for some lower skilled students or students that are new to an activity, try to emphasize other areas of achievement. All right? You can do this for students that are injured and can't participate as well. You can design some alternative assessments to assess their knowledge. You could do some kind of homework. You could have them do a video analysis. You could have them be an expert in scoring. Or you could even work on teamwork to see if they could coach or manage a team. All right? So there are a lot of different things you can do with some students that have lower skill or have some kind of specific challenge within that unit. So another important thing to remember is, and you'll get a lot of this information in your adaptive PE class, but you have to consider your grading practices for students with special needs. All right? So students with disabilities in a school setting could have a couple of things. If they meet all the different criteria to get an individualized education program, that student will have an IEP document, and they will have an IEP meeting that the PE teacher should be invited to, and you'll set goals for that specific student, and those goals should be used as a basis for the grade. What are the IEP goals? Did the student meet their specific goals? Because remember, this is an individualized education plan, so they will be assessed differently than everybody else in class. There's another form you might hear called a 504 plan, and it is a plan for students with disabilities or challenges that don't meet the IEP guidelines but still need assistance. And a lot of times on that 504 plan, there'll be some specific goals or some adaptations listed to help them, and look at those too, just like you would an IEP. If there's specific goals, make sure you assess the student's ability to meet the goals. For students with special needs, it's important to include a narrative with a grade to provide an explanation of the achievement to parents. Did they meet the IEP goals? Why didn't they? How could they improve? Right? So if you write a narrative, that's just not giving them A, B, C, or D. The student performed at a 50% skill level on serving the volleyball. All right. And then you could give them ways to improve as well. That's really what you're going to have to do, because every year this IEP gets reauthorized, so they'll have new goals. If you provide a good narrative, it just really helps in the next year's development of the IEP. All right. And then last, modify assessments used for grading anytime it's appropriate. So refer to the IEP and the 504 plan, because they might provide some suggested modifications. Document these modifications on your lesson plan, and then do some other research, discuss things with students, and see what you can do to help make your activity as appropriate for that individual with disability as it is for the rest of the class. So that you might have to do things different, but don't be afraid to change the assessment to be individualized based on a student's individualized education program. Not everybody has to be assessed the same as long as they're assessed fairly. So here are some important grading practices for students with special needs. So if you have an ESL student, which stands for English as a Second Language, and this is across the country, there's going to be a lot of ESL programs. We actually host some adult ESL programs through Lincoln University. All right. So when you're working with ESL students, remember, language can be a barrier. All right. They can't always necessarily, they might be able to start to speak the language, but writing may become difficult. So if this is what's going on, you can use interviews or question and answer between the teacher and the student. All right. They might be able to verbalize it even though they can't write it. Or you can do some role plays to have them act out what's going on to show you that they understand. You could use this to substitute for a writing activity. Remember, gameplay can help assess the knowledge of rules. You may have a rules test that your ESL students don't understand the language in the test, but when they're playing the game, they can follow the rules. If that's the case, you can assess their knowledge of rules through gameplay. Provide as much access as you can to translation. This may be hand signals. If you're teaching rules, teach the hand signals that go along with violations. It might be an opportunity to use technology. You could use things such as Google Translate on a phone. A lot of times when I've been speaking with students or parents that are in this ESL group, you can speak right into your phone. You can have Google Translate speak the information out, and it really is something that can speed up the time frame for translation. All right. Do you have a professional translator or student translator? Can you get access to that for your class? In most small school districts, that becomes a financial challenge, but in some larger school districts where there's a group of students that have the same primary language, you might have a translator. Make sure you provide extended time for translation when students don't, when English isn't their first language, I'm sorry. So it might be you provide them extra time on tests or assignments. And then try to do everything you can to establish policies, guidelines, and processes for fair grading for ESL students. Let's look at some additional suggestions for effective grading practices. When you're a teacher, remember, like I said, everybody wants to get an A, but everybody probably shouldn't get an A in the class. We should establish high standards for achievement. Have you ever heard that the cream rises to the top, right? When you set high standards, people tend to achieve those higher standards. Remember, it's also important to set the bar at the appropriate level of challenge. Make sure that your highly skilled students have a high challenge for them, and make sure that your new students to the activity or students with lower skill have an appropriate level of challenge, and then continuing to move that bar towards your higher standard. Remember, look at achievement through a variety of lenses. What does this mean? This means provide a variety of opportunities. Test skills, all right, for the students that are natural athletes. Test knowledge for your students that may not be natural athletes, but can understand how things go together. Look at how students apply the skills they learn in a game setting, and also see if there's a deeper level of understanding. Remember, we don't just take one test. We use a variety of different assessments to look at achievement. Don't forget to show the assessment plan early in the unit. Let students know how they're going to be tested. Is it going to be skills? Is it going to be knowledge? Is it going to be a combination of both? How are the grades going to be weighted? Maybe even what is the scoring guide for the culminating or summative activity? And then do everything you can to keep the grading system balanced. That means have appropriate percentages of your points for skill assessment, for knowledge and understanding, for application of skills in both an individual and team setting, a little bit possibly on improvement or achievement, right, to help students stay motivated. So make sure you keep your system balanced by the percentages. Here's some additional suggestions for effective grading practices. Remember, allow students multiple opportunities for success. Consider those ideas such as standard-based and mastery-based grading approaches we talked about earlier in this lecture. Allow some extra time for skill development and practice, especially for your lesser skilled students. You may have, and I used to call this when I was teaching, a drill factory, and you would have students go through the different drills and then rotate into gameplay. All right, so instead of having students sitting out rotating into a game, you might have them go through drills and then get into the game, or have different levels of games going on at different times. You might use assessments for multiple purposes other than just grading. Remember, your formative assessments should be used to develop skill and provide feedback specific to learning and improvement. Do you have a practice test? Do you use the practice test based on mastery? If the students master the practice test, they don't have to take the next test. Do you have extra practice sessions at lunchtime or after school practice, or allow students to do some things at home? And then avoid averaging scores to arrive at a student's grade. What does that mean? Critical components should be weighted more heavily, so make sure that they are. They're worth more points. Don't just say there are 4 components, each one is worth 25% if one component's more important. So remember, when we're trying to figure out how to weigh grades, what are the most important learning or performance objectives for a specific activity? Weigh that more. If some things are more important within a unit, make that assignment worth more points. Let's wrap up our suggestions for improving your effective grading practices. Try not to just assign lower grades in order to motivate students to try harder. Oh, you have a C, you gotta give a little bit better effort. Remember, motivation should be a real small part of the grade. Your grade should be based on achievement. Try to do everything you can to avoid assigning a 0 when calculating grades. Do you allow any type of late work with any reason to count for limited partial credit? Can you provide an independent attempt for a makeup score for a 0? There are some things and some compliance issues that go with this, but try to do everything you can to allow students to earn at least some percentage of the point if they can show mastery for a specific subject area or criteria. Seek additional information when grading those borderline students. What do you need to know or see from the student to move them up or down a level if they're right in the middle? Right? So maybe have them do some different opportunities, ask some follow-up questions. If it's based on gameplay, maybe ask them a couple rules questions. And that might be able to help you determine which level they go in. Try to do everything you can to minimize the subjectivity on assignments that lead to a grade. Remember, we don't want to be subjective and just say, oh, the student got this. We want to design and use both valid and reliable assessments to determine the grade. All right? This leaves it less open to interpretation in the scoring guides, so try to be very specific when you're developing your scoring guides. That makes them more valid and reliable. And then a note on extra credit. Don't just provide extra work to give extra credit. Only provide extra credit for extra learning. When students really need it, you might provide that, and it shouldn't be a come ask me because you're a borderline student. You should probably, as an instructor, have a couple extra credit opportunities built within your semester plan that provide for extra learning. Don't just make up an extra credit assignment to help a student that didn't do what they were supposed to do. So let's provide a quick chapter summary and to wrap up this chapter. Consider what students and parents would like to know when designing grade reports, and design your grade reports to actually communicate with the students and parents to describe what their student has achieved and then areas that could be used for improvement. Remember, you need to consider the grades as the reward for student achievement. They must be earned, not given. I always tell students, all I do is report your grade. You earn it. I don't assign a grade, I report it. Minimize the subjectivity on assessments used for grading. Remember, rewarding effort, improvement, and attitude may actually be hard to judge. That's really just subjective. So consider using criteria from the NASP standards and subjectivity. Do we want to have students write some kind of reflective statement for NASP standard number 5 instead of just rewarding what we think it could be? Remember, it's important to weigh your important criteria or your important objectives within a unit with more points or a higher percentage related to the grade. The most important things should have higher point totals. And then use assessments that indicate student performance and achievement directly related to the standards and objectives that you're teaching in class. Try not to score something that isn't what you've taught and given them opportunities to improve in class. So here's an important journal activity. So take out a clean sheet of paper, write the answers to the following 5 questions, and place them in your portfolio. There's a good chance I'm going to ask to see them in class the next day. So explain standards and standard-based grading. All right? Explain mastery grading. Explain how to provide fair grading for students with varying skill levels. Explain how to provide fair grading for students with special needs, those that could be on an IEP or 504 plan. And then list 3 suggestions to help provide effective grading practices in a PE class. All right, that's your journal activity, and this should help you assess your own understanding of today's video lecture. Make sure you write these out and bring them in your portfolio. I may ask to see them next class period. So here's your to-do list as we wrap up today's video lecture. If you haven't yet, make sure you've read Chapter 13 and then complete the Chapter 13 reading quiz. The deadline's up on Canvas and it's due about the same time you're doing this video lecture. Number 2, study for that Unit 2 exam. Remember, that's Chapters 4, 8, and 13 over rubrics, progressive and culminating assessments, and grading in PE. And then make sure you look forward to Module 10. Handed this out in our last in-class meeting, and look at your final assignment. Make sure you download, if you weren't in class, the instructions. Download the template on Canvas. And then don't wait until the last minute, because this is a challenging culminating activity. Start working on it now. So, a couple quick words about our final assignment. It's a culminating and summative activity for the assessment class. It's an assessment of understanding of a variety of concepts that pull the whole course together. It's really associated with understanding the planning and use of different scoring guides and an assessment strategy. Remember, this activity is very challenging. It has some kind of real-world application and will be used to assess your depth of knowledge and overall skills and understanding and planning an assessment strategy for a unit. Why did I pick this activity? This activity is modeled after an actual task that PE teachers and college professors do as part of the teaching and learning process to plan assessments. Remember, look at Module 10, all right? And that's where your instructions in the template are located in Canvas, all right? I gave you the handout for the final product instructions in our previous class. And then look at the assignment deadline posted on Canvas, start working on this thing, and it's due in Module 10. What is the Unit 2 exam? Chapters 4, 8, and 13 over scoring guides and rubrics, culminating in progressive assessments, and grading in PE. There are 55 selected response questions. These are multiple choice and true-false. You have 110 minutes, so 2 minutes per question. Make sure you study prior to starting the exam. It's open for about 5 days, and the exam deadline and opening date are on campus. All right? Hopefully, you've picked up a variety of new things today based on grading and physical education. We discussed things like standard-based grading, mastery grading, providing effective grades, uh, the considerations for varying skill levels and special needs students, and I listed a bunch of suggestions from the book and my background on effective grading practices in PE. So make sure you study for your test. Good luck on the Unit 2 exam. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to email me. We'll see you next time.